Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles, even if they are launched from other sides of the world and even if they are launched from space, but including hypersonic missiles, ballistic missiles, and advanced cruise missiles. All of them will be.
And its spot in the middle of the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans offers a strategic vantage point for early missile detection.
Donald Trump just announced new tariff threats against European countries regarding his desire to outright purchase Greenland. In this video, we've got to talk about what this means. Not only why does Donald Trump even care, we'll go through a refresher on this, but most importantly, what does this mean for the future of NATO? What does this mean for Russia if there is no future NATO? And how is China reacting to this? Of course, bottom line out of all of it, what does this mean for our money? Not only US debt, but investment opportunities and what becomes even more important amongst these threats. Let's talk in this video. So let's get started. Donald Trump was expected to just go golfing today, but no, before he went golfing, he had to send a tweet. A Truth Social post. He stated that the UK, Denmark, other European countries would essentially, starting February 1st, have a 15% tariff on all or any goods. And that tariff, if they stand in the way of the Greenland acquisition by the United States, will rise to 25% on June 1st. This would, of course, include countries like Denmark, Norway, France, Germany, and then, of course, those we mentioned like UK, Sweden, and then as well as the Netherlands, Finland, as many of them as he can get his hands on to increase tariffs on, essentially. And, of course, these tariffs would stay until such time that a deal is reached for the, quote, total and complete purchase of Greenland, which is really interesting because we thought tariffs sort of ended in 2025, given that the European Union and countries around the world struck trade deals with Donald Trump. In fact, we clearly saw when the European Union made a trade deal with Donald Trump for 15% tariffs, down from some of those announced Liberation Day tariff levels, which were substantially higher than that. The European Union almost felt defeated, like they were sort of arm wrestled into the deal, but they thought the deal was done. Even the PM of the United Kingdom thought, all right, we've made a deal. We can finally be over tariffs. The problem now is tariffs are back because Donald Trump has a new interest, and so now we've got a whole new level of new tariffs to consider, all while the Supreme Court is essentially at this point twiddling their thumbs on actually ruling on IEEPA tariffs, likely because the IEEPA tariffs will be overruled by the Supreme Court, and a lot of folks at the Supreme Court are quite friendly to Donald Trump. So the more they can kick the can down the road of a tariff ruling and the more the economy seemingly holds up, the more the Supreme Court doesn't risk rocking the boat in waiting. So it's no surprise that they're making us wait. But now we're literally going back to the Liberation Day playbook of, I want something, so I'll issue tariffs, which I wonder if the tariff deals that were negotiated had like a clause in them that are like, hey, if we strike this deal with you, you agree not to tariff us for other new stuff? I'm guessing not, because here we are again. And this does create some problems because the first time with these tariff threats, we had a lot of hate against the United States. Europeans, the Chinese, South Americans, people were cheering about unity amongst them in consolidarity for each other against the United States. And now that many countries have made deals with the United States, you kind of face a little bit of an ego blow here that, oh, well, we thought we made a deal, now tariffs are back. Now, of course, this is where the supporters of Donald Trump say, well, you know, other countries use tariffs, so why can't we? And then, of course, this is where logic has to prevail, and we have to recognize that trade-weighted tariffs, so how much we actually trade based on what tariffs were, against the United States were really anywhere between 1.5% to about 2% for countries around the world. Average tariffs that we imposed on other countries were about 2.2%. That level of tariffs has now, at least before this Greenland issue, risen to a nominal tariff level of 18%, which is about 8 to 9 times as large as what the tariff level previously was. And while there are plenty of loopholes to enable lowering those tariffs to maybe 12 to 13%, this new batch of tariffs threatens to sort of evoke the good old Liberation 2.0 concern, which does create some opportunities in the stock market, which we'll talk about towards the end of the video. But in the near term, you can bet that once again, Europeans, Chinese, and South Americans, or others throughout the world are going to again say, here's an opportunity to make deals with each other and not the United States. And I think in the long term, that's not great for the United States. Today, we have the power, but will we forever? That's the concern. See, coincidentally or not, today, the European Union and South American countries signed the largest free trade agreement in the last 25 years. China and the United States aren't happy about that because the Europeans are now wanting to trade via free trade with South America. South America's got crops and cattle, the European Union has industrial technologies. And what are they doing? They're not just signing this free trade deal, but they're branding it as a fair trade deal. See, Ursula von der Leyen, EU lady, right? She, quote, says, "We chose fair trade over tariffs. We chose a productive long-term partnership over isolation." This is smart. This is branding that free and fair trade is the way to go. And while Donald Trump wants to arm wrestle higher tariffs, just like he did during Liberation Day, under the premise of peace through strength and the premise that tariffs are a tool to negotiate to get what he wants, and we'll talk about the likely outcomes here in a moment, other friends of ours are becoming more friendly with each other. The same thing is being done in China, where China is not only trying to cozy up to European countries, but just this morning we've got foreign ministers in Europe, specifically Germany here, saying that it's high time the European Union strengthens global cooperation with China, right? So in other words, we're driving more trade and more friendly relations out of the U.S. into foreign countries. This is problematic. We don't necessarily see the impact of that. Well, frankly, potentially for decades, we won't see it. But those relations are being built, and every time drama like this happens, those relations get stronger, our relations get weaker. It's kind of like the opposite of advertising good foreign policy and democracy. It's like advertising bad foreign policy and bad, like the opposite of democracy, more like imperialism or a dictatorship, right? Not ideal. So now, why then does China benefit here? Well, understand that China loves doing anything that they can via their propaganda channels to make Donald Trump look foolish so they can then weaponize that foolish look and look smart and fair to the people they're trying to trade with. China is exporting deflation. They're in a deflationary depression, essentially. So they're exporting deflation to countries like Europe or elsewhere around the world. We would actually experience much more deflation and lower prices if we didn't tariff China the most out of any other country. But understand that China will stop at nothing to make us look foolish. As an example, commander of Denmark's Joint Arctic Command rejects president's claims on Chinese and Russian ships circling around Greenland. Basically, the Global Times, which is a Chinese paper, is arguing that Donald Trump is wrong, that there are no Russian or Chinese combat ships, because here's a guy who is the Major Soren Andersen of the Denmark Joint Arctic Command, who says that he hasn't seen any Russian or Chinese combat ships in the 2.5 years he's been a commander in the very region. Now, of course, this is Chinese propaganda. Everybody's going to have their propaganda. But the point is, China is trying to leverage everything they can to make the U.S. look foolish. Tariffs, Donald Trump loves. He says it's his favorite word, then he gets made fun of, like how is like wife or like Jesus not your favorite word? And then he's like, all right, it's my 5th favorite word, okay? Whatever. The point is, Donald Trump is aggressively going back to a tariff stance because the full impact of tariffs that we had from Liberation Day was so buttered out and delayed. we never really got a full dose of the impacts of tariffs. We won't actually be at a year-over-year level of tariffs until, frankly, this summer, when we really saw a lot of them actually go into effect post-pauses, which means the full impact of tariffs aren't really seen yet. Donald Trump is using that void of an impact of tariffs, which they're still coming, to argue that, well, I mean, hey, tariffs are raising revenue for us, and clearly the economy hasn't fallen off a cliff yet, so why not just tariff more? Now, the long-term outcome of that is probably really bad and will write its own history book on why repeating the mistakes of the 1930s via tariffs are just going to end up being mistakes again. But in the near term, Donald Trump is using this impression of success via tariffs as a citation to his belief that let's just use more tariffs and do it again. And so that's where we stand today. We have Donald Trump not only suggesting that we are subsidizing Denmark, which if you look directly at what's going on in Denmark, or Greenland rather, this isn't true. Denmark subsidizes Greenland by about $600 million every single year, making up about 20% of Greenland's GDP. Donald Trump, though, makes the argument that, well, we indirectly subsidize Greenland and, frankly, all European countries because of our contributions towards NATO. Now, this you have to give Trump credit for. Yes, here is a pie chart of 2017 NATO defense spending, and as you can see, the United States makes up the vast majority of that pie, over 65% of it. Over the last year and a half of Donald Trump's, well, more like year of Donald Trump's presidency, we've actually seen that NATO spending rise by European countries, as European countries admit they need to spend more of their GDP towards defense spending. This, by the way, has led companies like Rheinmetall, it's kind of like the Lockheed Martin of Germany, to absolutely skyrocket. The company has been a very popular stock for people to buy in the United States as well, and it makes sense because, well, frankly, people like buying stocks when they go straight up. And, well, it's not exactly straight up. It's pretty dang up. You can see here, right from Donald Trump's inauguration, right around here was Trump's inauguration, the stock was trading for 125 buckaroonies, and it's now sitting with a $100 billion market cap at $443. Pretty impressive. And a lot of that is because of Europe's commitment to spend more on defense spending. So again, you can't say that everything Donald Trump is doing is wrong or bad. This is a good thing, right? But we should always try to separate that just because we haven't seen the effects of tariffs yet today, and just because of the branding about, well, other countries use tariffs, why don't we? Fails on a logical point of view, strictly because of the magnitude of the difference, but also because of the facts that most of these large tariff numbers that we see, like, oh, Canada charges 150% tariffs on XYZ, are tariffs that are never actually paid. They don't actually matter. They're just sort of these larger anti-dumping limits that never even get approached. But again, logic is, I think, why you come here, because we're not paid to be a Democrat or Republican. If anything, we are unpaid to sit in the middle and just speak the truth, because I think that is the most valuable thing. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean I'm always right. I'll make mistakes, but my goal is just to share perspective and say that, hey, you know what Donald Trump is really seeing here? He's seeing money.